We continue now at the top of Daf 85a Daf and Meseches Bava Kamma. This is Bava Kamma Daf 85a. On the previous summit, the Gemara was discussing our Mishnah, which said that one does have to pay for tsar even if there's no nezik. If the person causes pain, even if there's no damage, one does have to pay. The Gemara initially thought that was following Ben Azai in the Brisa. Then the Gemara said it could be that it's actually following Rebbe in the Brisa. It's unclear how to interpret the machlokas Rebbe and Ben Azai. And now the Gemara is offering another interpretation of the machlokas between Ben Azai and Rebbe. Bechlalu prat hamiruchakim zemizeh kamiflage. It could be they're arguing about something else entirely. They're arguing about when you have a klalu prat that are far away from each other. Rebbe Savar ein danino so bechlalu prat. Rebbe holds that you don't judge that as a klalu prat. Ben Azai Savar danino so bechlalu prat. Ben Azai says we do count that as a klalu prat. And Rashi explains, Rebbe Savar ein dan, and Rebbe says we don't count that as a klalu prat. Hachanami here also, kaviyah nemra tchila klal, meaning kaviyah said first. The full pasuk is kaviyah tachas kaviyah, that's a burn for a burn. Then it says petza tachas patza, that's the interruption in the pasuk. And then it says chabura tachas chabura, that's the wound that we were talking about. So again, it says kaviyah first, that's a klal. The kaviyah mashma, bein sheyeshima chabura, bein she'enima chabura, like the Gemara just said in the previous summit. The word kaviyah sounds like it's a pain that's inflicted whether there's a wound or not. Now, if the word chabura was right next to the word kaviyah, if you didn't have petza tachas patza in the middle, so have a darshi, so then we would darshan chabura prat, that chabura is considered to be a prat, ve'en bechlal alamasha, a prat, and you can only include the prat, yeshima chabura in, einima chabura lo, meaning only if there's a wound, otherwise you don't have to pay. That's what we would have said. But hashda dechsiv petza bein time, but now that it says the word petza in the middle, lo daininan, so therefore we don't judge it as a klalu prat, and therefore according to Rebbe, you're going to have to pay even if there is no wound. You'll have to pay for tsar. And again, this is another interpretation that would have Rebbe in line with our Mishnah. Now the Gemara later will ask, Chabura l'Rebbe lamali. Well, if Chabura is not there as a prat for the klalu prat, what is Chabura there for? And the idea of the language of Rebbe in the Brisa was that kaviyah is stated first. What does that mean? Meaning, from the beginning of the pasuk, it's clear that you're chayiv, even if it's just pain alone, if it's just a burn alone. And don't say that the hemshach of the pasuk, as the pasuk goes on to say chabura, that limits it to when there's a wound. Ve'ein danen, because we are not going to say that this is a klalu pratu masnis and Rebbe. And according to this approach as well as the approach they said in the previous Amud, this approach also is suggesting that our Mishnah follows Rebbe, but again for an entirely different reason. And Ben Azai would say no, it's a klalu prat, meaning that it says chabura, and therefore it's only when there's a wound, otherwise you don't pay. And again, within this interpretation, our Mishnah would not follow Ben Azai. And the Gemara continues, v'chitema. Now, if you're going to say, according to this explanation, chabura l'Rebbe lamali, well then what is the word chabura there for according to Rebbe? If you're not using it for klalu prat, what is it there for? And the Gemara says to that, l'damim yiseirim, it's for the extra compensation. Rashi explains, lamali ho'elu me'reisha shamina l'tarvayu, since you learn everything from the first part of the pasuk, you don't need chabura at all. What is it for according to Rebbe? L'damim yiseirim, it's for the extra compensation, meaning, the ilochsiv el kaviyah tachas kaviyah, if it only wrote a burn for a burn, hava amrinan bein is bechabura, bein less bechabura, I would say whether there's a wound, whether there's no wound, to make kaviyah mishalim, that you have to pay the amount of the burn, avol tarti lo mishalim, you don't have to pay both. Maybe I would say that you only pay for the kaviyah, only for the burn, only for the pain, kamash malan de mishalim tarvayu. That's what the pasuk is teaching us, that you pay both of them. Tosas discusses this because Tosas say, isn't that so obvious? Do you really need a chabura to teach us that? But in any case, that's Rashi's explanation. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Omdin Kamma Adam Kayotze Bazer Rotzalitol V'chula. We evaluate how much would a person want to take for this kind of pain. That's how we evaluate the payment of tsar. The Gemara says, Tsar b'makom nezek hechi shamin. If you have pain in a situation where there is damage as well, how do you evaluate what the pain is? You're already paying, let's say, for the hand that was cut off. How do you evaluate the tsar? Amar Avua de Shmuel, the father of Shmuel, says, Omdim Kamma Adam Rotzalito Liktoa Lo Yado. We evaluate how much would a person want to be paid to have his hand cut off. The Gemara says, Liktoa Lo Yado, to have his hand cut off. Lo Tsar Lechudehu, that's not only pain. Hakulu Chamisha Devarmika, that encompasses all 5 of the payments. V'yod, and furthermore, B'shaftani Arskinan, are we dealing with idiots that are going to take money to have their hands cut off? Ella, rather, the way to evaluate is as follows. Liktoa Yado Haketua, to cut off his hand, which is cut off. Rashi explains, Yado haketua u'mechuberes begidin semusin ve'ena ru'uya lo l'melacha. It's almost completely severed. It's barely attached. It's totally not functional. That's what we're talking about in terms of to evaluate the amount of pain. But the Gemara still says, Yado haktu anami, if you have a hand that's basically cut off as well. Lo tsar l'chudaika, that's not only pain. Hatsaru voshasika, there's pain and there's also humiliation. T'chsif alein milsa, l'mishkal mibasaru, l'mishti l'klavim, it's embarrassing to take from his body, to take from his flesh and throw it to the dogs. Ella, rather, the Gemara says, here's how you evaluate. Omden Kamma adam rotza litol, l'ktoa lo yado hamuchtav l'malchus, how much would a person want to take to have his hand cut off, and the government anyways is going to do that. It's already been decreed that his hand is going to be cut off. Bein sam l'sayef, but the amount that he would take, that instead of having it done with a medicine that's going to make it that he's not going to feel anything, instead it will be done with a sword. How much money would he want that it should be done with the sword without anything to alleviate the pain? But the Gemara says, Amri, they said to that, Hachanami lo shakel umitzar nafshe, over there also, is he not going to take it and he's going to have that kind of a pain? Rashi here explains, Bein sam l'sayef, between having the medicine and not, Yado hamuchteves l'melech l'kotzitza b'sam she'ein sham tsar klal. Let's say his hand is going to be cut off by the government, but if he had it cut off with a sam, with a medicine, there's no pain at all. Kamma rotzalito l'kotza b'sayef. You evaluate how much money would he take not to have that, in other words, to do it with the pain. But the Gemara said to that doesn't make any sense. Halo shakil kol mammon sheba'olam. A person's not going to take any amount of money. There's no amount of money. Let's say nafshi lekotza, that he'd be willing to have that kind of pain. V'chan kvar nasa ma'isen, here the hand has already been cut off. It's already been done, so you can't evaluate in that fashion. That would be an enormous amount of money that a person would want in order not to have the sam. And so the Gemara says, Ella, rather, the way we evaluate is as follows. Omdim Kamma adam rotza litein lektoa lo yado hamuchtav l'malchus. We evaluate how much would a person want to give. Let's say his hand is being cut off by the government. Bein sayef l'sam. In other words, he'd want to pay money to have that sam, to have the medicine that it shouldn't hurt. And so how much would he pay for that? That's the amount of the pain. The Gemara says, Hai litol litein miboile. But if that's the case, that might make sense. But the word is litol, to take. But here you're really evaluating how much he's willing to give, how much he's willing to pay. And the Gemara says to that, Amar Rav Huna b'Reid Rav Yoshua. Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yoshua, says it means litol zeh mizeh mashenos an zeh. It means to take this one from this one, the amount that this other theoretical person would give. Meaning, we say how much would this person pay in order that it shouldn't be painful, and that amount we collect from the person who inflicted this pain. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Ripoi, the payment of Ripoi, hiko chayiv l'rapo. So if he strikes him, then he's obligated to pay for the healing, to pay the medical bills. The Gemara says, Tana Rabban, the rabbis taught, if sores develop because of the wound, v'nistra hamaka, and the wound reappears, chayiv l'rapo, so he has to pay for the healing. V'chayiv liton lo d'mei shivto, he also has to pay for the sheves, for the lost work. Shalom machmas hamaka, but if they develop not because of the original wound, eino chayiv l'rapo, so he's not chayiv to heal him. V'eino chayiv liton lo d'mei shivto, he doesn't have to pay the sheves as well. That's the opinion of the Tana Kamma. Rabbi Yehuda says, af machmas hamaka, even if the sores develop because of the wound, chayiv l'rapo, so he does have to pay for the healing. V'eino chayiv litin lo d'mei shivto. However, he doesn't have to pay for the sheves. Rabbi Yehuda makes a distinction between the ripoy and the sheves. The Chachamim say shifto or refuasa. When it comes to sheves and refuah, kol shechayev b'sheves chayev b'ripoy. If one is chayev to pay sheves, he's chayev to pay for the ripoy. V'sheino chayev b'sheves, eino chayev b'ripoy. But if he's not chayev in sheves, he's not chayev in ripoy. And therefore, the Chachamim say that in this case, even if it's machmas hamaka, nothing has to be paid. Since the sheves doesn't have to be paid, the ripoy doesn't have to be paid either. And the Gemara continues, B'mai kamiflagi, what is the machlokus, this three-way machlokus between the Tana Kamma and Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim? What are they arguing about? Amar Rabba says, Ashke chasinu l'Rabbanan b'Bei Rav, I found the Rabbanan in the Beis Medrash. Some say Bei Rav means in the actual yeshiva of Rav. In any case, I found the Rabbanan b'Bei Rav, the Yasvi v'Kamri, they were sitting and they were saying as follows, Hacha b'makon nitna liyaged kamiflagi. Here they're arguing about a wound. The question is whether it's permissible, so to speak, to wrap it up. Are you held accountable for that? Meaning to say, what could happen is sometimes you have a wound and the person wraps it because he doesn't want it to get cold, but then by wrapping it, it causes warmth and hevel, and that actually causes these sores to develop. So that's the issue over here. Rabbanan savri makon nitna liyaged. The Rabbanan hold that it's normal, it's okay to wrap up the wound, and therefore the person who was wounded is not held responsible, and therefore the person who caused the injury, if the injury reopens up, that person has to pay for everything. He has to pay for the ripoy and the sheves. For Rabbi Yehuda savar maka lo nitna liyaged, and Rabbi Yehuda says it's not true. A maka is no lo nitna liyaged. If the person wrapped it up and that caused these sores to develop, then the person who caused the original injury is not responsible. But we make a distinction as follows according to Rabbi Yehuda. Ripoy detana beikra, when it comes to ripoy, which the pasuk repeated, it says v'rapo yirapeh in a double language, mechayev, so that the person still does have to pay. Sheves delotani beikra lo mechayev, but sheves, which was not repeated in the pasuk, the person is not chayev. And the Gemara continues, Va'aminu lahu anan. Now I said back to them, meaning Rabba said back to the Rabbanan of Beirav, the Rabba said back, Imaka lo nitna lieged, if it is true that Maka lo nitna lieged, ripoy nami lo mechayev. So then, when it comes to ripoy, you're not going to have to pay for ripoy, meaning to say, if you're going to say like Rabbi Yehuda, that Maka lo nitna lieged, so then you wouldn't say that you're chayev to pay for the healing in such a situation. Ela dekuli alma Maka nitna lieged. But really what you have to say is, everybody agrees that it's normal to wrap up a wound, velo nitna lieged yisera, but it's not normal to do extra bandages. Rabbi Yehuda is sovereign, so therefore Rabbi Yehuda already makes sense. In that context, Rabbi Yehuda holds, Kevin de lo nitna lieged yisera, since it's not something that you're supposed to wrap up, you're not supposed to overly wrap it up, so then we make that distinction, ripoy de tana beikra mechayev, when it comes to healing, which the pasuk repeats that he's chayev to pay according to Rabbi Yehuda, sheves de lo tana beikra lo mechayev, but sheves, which is not repeated in the pasuk, he does not have to pay. For Rabbanan savri, but the Rabbanan hold, Kevin de tana beikra beripoy, once the pasuk repeats by ripoy and says chayev by ripoy, sheves nami mechayev, sheves also is chayev to iskish l'ripoy, because it's compared to ripoy. For Rabbi Yehuda savri, but Rabbi Yehuda holds, sheves lo mechayev, it's not true, sheves is not chayev to miyate rachmana rak, because the pasuk has an exclusion, because it says rak shifto yitain v'rapo yirape, and therefore that's an exclusion. We make the distinction between ripoy and sheves. But the Rabbanan say rak l'shalom machmas hamaka hu da'asa. Rak is an exclusion, but that comes to exclude payment in a situation where the sores develop not because of the original wound. And the Gemara continues, Rabbanan Basrai. Now, according to the last shita in that price, so according to the later Rabbanan, the Amri Kol Shechai B'Sheves Chai B'Ripoy V'Chol She'eno Chai B'Sheves Eno Chai B'Ripoy. They say that anyone who's chayiv to pay Sheves pays Ripoy. Anyone who's not chayiv to pay Sheves does not pay Ripoy. So they're not using at all the repetition of the pasuk of V'Rapo Yirape. So Ripoy D'Tana Beikra Lamali. What's the reason, according to them, that the word Ripoy is repeated in the pasuk that it says V'Rapo Yirape? And the Gemara says that's needed. That is needed for the teaching of the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael the Tanya, because we learned in a brayso the Rabbi Yishmael Omer. In the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael they say v'rapo yirapei. The pasuk says v'rapo yirapei. Mikan sheniten reshus l'rofe l'rapos. From here we see that permission is given for the doctor to heal. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Minayin shim alubot smachim machmas hamaka v'nistra hamaka shechayev l'raposo v'chayev litin lo shifta. From where do we know that if sores develop because of the wound and the wound opens up, that the person is chayev to pay the healing and chayev to pay for the sheves? Talmud the pasuk says, Rak shifto yitain v'rapo yirape. We learn it from this pasuk, Rak shifto yitain v'rapo yirape, that the person is chayev. Yachol afilu shalom machmas hamaka. Now I might think even if the sores develop not because of the wound, the person is chayev to pay. Talmud Lomar Rak, the pasuk says only that's an exclusion. You don't have to pay for that. Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda says, Af machmas hamaka pater, even if it's because of the wound, you don't have to pay. Shenamar rak, because it says rak is an exclusion. Ika diamri, there are those that say, Af machmas hamaka pater legamri karabon basroi. When Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda says, even machmas hamaka pater, what does he mean? Some people say he means you're pater totally, like the last Rabbanan in the Brisa, they say completely pater in that situation. V'ika diamri, and some say, Af machmas hamaka, even if it happens because of the wound, pater mi sheves. So the ptur, the exemption over here is only from sheves, the chayev b'ripoy, but there is a chayev in ripoy, there's a chayev to pay for the healing, keman kavu. And according to that interpretation of Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda is following his father, Rabbi Yehuda, in this regard. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Amar Mar, the master, said, Yachol afilo shalom machmas hamaka. I might think that a person has to pay even if the sores develop not because of the original wound. Talmud Lomar Rak, the pasuk says rak, says you don't have to pay for that. The Gemara says shalom machmas hamaka boy kra. If it's something that happens not because of the original wound, we need a pasuk to exclude it. Isn't it obvious that the person doesn't have to pay for that? And the Gemara says, Amri, the sage, is saying, Mai shalom machmas hamaka. What does it mean that something develops not because of the original wound? Kidatanya, it means like the following brisa. Harei sha'avra al divrei rofe. We're talking about a person, let's say the person transgressed, he violated what the doctor told him. V'yachal davash, and he ate honey, or kol mine mesika, or he ate some kind of sweet things. Mipnei shedavash, v'chol mine mesika, kashan lamaka, because honey and things that are sweet, they're actually bad for a wound. V'hela makaso gargusni, and then his wound, it developed gargusni, which the Gemara will explain. And so that's what caused this to happen. Yachol yechayev l'raposa. I might think in that case he has to pay for the healing, because again, that happened because the person was avar al divrei rofe. The Gemara says, Talmud Lomar Rak, the pasuk says rak, that case is excluded. You don't have to pay for that. It's that own person's fault that he didn't follow what the doctor said. And the Gemara says, Maya gargusni, what is gargusni? Amar Abaya says, Nasa krichta, that refers to necrosis. Maya suse, what is the healing for that? The Gemara says, Ahla vikira vikalba, crystalline ice plant and wax and wine dregs. And the Gemara continues, V'yamar le asich anaf, the person who caused the injury says to the injured person, I'll heal you, I'm a doctor, that way he doesn't have to pay for it. Amar le, the injured party can say back, Damis alai ka'arya arba, you're like a predatory lion to me, I don't want to use you as my doctor. V'yamar le maisuna asya demagin b'magin, if he says, I'll bring a doctor who does it free, we don't have to pay for it. Amar le, the injured party can say back, asya demagin b'magin, magin shava, a doctor who heals for free is worth nothing, is worthless. V'yamar maisin alach asya rechika, and let's say the person says, I'll bring a doctor from far away that's cheaper. Amar le, then the injured party can say back, asya rechika, a doctor who's from far away, eino avira, he causes the eyes to go blind. As Rashi says, Eino avira shasad leilech ledarko, because he's just going to go back home. He doesn't care if he accidentally blinds the person. He's not around to suffer the consequences. V'yamar if he says to him, if the injured party says, Havli ledidi, just give me the money, v'anam masina nafshay, and I'll go find a way to heal myself. I'll find a doctor. Amar le, so then the other one can say back, Pashata b'nafshcha, you might mess yourself up. You're not going to actually heal yourself. V'shakalta minoi tvay, and then you're going to ask me for more money. V'yamar le, now if the injured party says, Kotzli mikatz, you should just give me a set amount. We'll just settle on a set amount, and if it costs more, I'll pay it. Amar le, still, the person who caused the injury can say back to him, Kol shekain de pashata b'nafshach, certainly what's going to happen is you're going to want to keep the money, you're not really going to heal yourself. V'karuli shor amazik, and everyone will call me an axe that does damage. And the Gemara continues, Tana was taught, V'kulan mishtalmin b'makom nezek. All of these are paid in situations of damage, meaning to say, when you're paying the tsar, ripoy, sheves, and boshes, you have to pay all of those in a situation where there's actual damage. And the Gemara says, Menohani mili, from where do we know this? Amar Rav Zvid mishmei de Rava, Rav Zvid says in the name of Rava, Amar Kratz, because the pasuk says, Petza tachas potza, litein tsar b'makom nezek. The pasuk of Petza tachas potza says that you have to pay pain even in a situation of damage. The Gemara says, Hami boile, but don't we need that pasuk for something else? And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Pei Amud Beis.